Hello, Mr. Dondolare.
Hello, hello. Good day.
So you are a human player
Yes.
from Norway,
Yes.
and you can speak both native like English and Norwegian language.
Yeah, at least I hope so, yeah.
Okay, perfect. And you play human, but also you are contributing into the community with your expertise about the current state of the game. And I would like to say how your interest started into looking into balance in more advanced way than just complaining in the Twitch chat.
Yeah, we can start with that. You know what? I think it started with, well, first of all, I'm becoming pretty old. I've given up. I started playing Warcraft 3 like solos again after probably over a 10-year break. So I started playing in 2021. I've quickly gave up any ambition to be like a very good player. But I always been as my job and just like general interest, always been a numbers and statistics kind of guy. And being an avid watcher of Warcraft in general, watching back to Warcraft, reading Reddit, etc., it quickly became pretty apparent that a lot of the views on like how balance were viewed and what the statistics you could interpret was pretty bad. And given that Champions also grew up as like a platform where you had a lot of possible data you could use, but weren't presented necessarily in a very useful way, it just kind of went from there. So the interest was more that for like, not that I actually, for me, it was that important to find what is the truth about balance. It's more just a curiosity thing. Like, what can we actually derive from this data? Is there anything interesting we can find? I still think, just as a personal like note, that using statistics and data in esports in general is super underutilized. I watch a lot of sports, especially American sports. You use like statistics very actively to try to find out what they're supposed to do, what's the optimal choice in this situation. And for video games, it's still very underutilized. People kind of play more by feel. So they say, okay, this is good for this, and maybe they give some reasons. And then sometimes we can even check on like, okay, this strategy is very good on this map. Then you check, okay, what's the win rates? You try to calculate with equal players. You see, it doesn't work. Right? It's like very bad on that map, and it does. But even things people think have been good for like 5 years can maybe sometimes be proven wrong. So it's just mostly a part of an interest, and also I think I'm just naturally a bit. I tend to try to organize stuff when I feel like everything is very chaotic. And the whole balance discussion and the way balanced feedback was given was super chaotic. The whole community giving IDs to make patches was 2-3 years ago, maybe when I started, like back when I started playing, that was already happening to a certain extent. But then you had like 14, 15 different patch notes, people like having different videos, and all the patches that like the PTRs released was like 50,000 different ideas with no coherent message. So that's also like one of the reasons to, if I had an idea to maybe try to make a more community-based total feedback, trying to get feedback from players, and then you need something. You need to know what the problem is before you know what you're going to fix, right? Hence, trying to find something about balance. Long explanation, but that's how I got into the whole balanced community talks. Yeah.
Okay, but we need to be careful how we analyze the data, correct?
Yeah.
Because if we just take the raw numbers, sometimes we may interpret them
Yeah.
as their as. So the common voice in the undead community is that undead is pretty weak, but happy is just built different. Then
Yeah.
he's like an anomaly. He's the greatest player there is. And how do you address this?
So like you can say in general, the reason why raw numbers, just like one quick side on that, reason why raw numbers, especially those presented in Champions webpage, is a bit misleading by itself. Is one, it includes every game that players leave early, disconnects. So the numbers themselves are not correct in that sense. Secondly, it doesn't take any account if a player, so if a player above a certain, for instance, if you look at the 2K 200 plus MMR bracket, it will include every game where the average MMR in that game is 2,200 and above. But it doesn't care if the one player is 2,700 or 2,900 in the case of Happy, and the other player is 2,200 or 2,000 even, right? Because the average is 2,200 above. And you would expect the higher rated player to win almost every game there. So that in itself doesn't tell you anything. That argument has been like given why we try to make some adjustments to how we deal with data has been talked about for ages. But in the case of Happy, it's interesting because There is no legitimately way to prove any of this. It's a fair discussion. To do that, we would have to make like a fake world where we knew this percentage happy is better and this percentage is like what the actual balance is. And it makes it difficult on the top level to say that if how much of the dominating or happy dominating, to be fair, not undead in general, is because of him and it's just because of basically happy being one of a kind, right? I think the most interesting balance like discussion topics are when you can find stuff that matches on several MMR brackets, because then at least it's an obvious issue.
Yes,
And
for example, I remember your point about undead versus human, where you
yeah,
pointed out that many humans tend to bank resources after like mid game
yeah,
in two base versus two base situation, and is it a good example that is like was easy for human to bank like 2,000 gold, and it may indicate that maybe it's like until this point human was favored, or
yeah,
it's like can you like because you may also say okay maybe he's favored in the mid game, but still the game will be decided in the eighth game, yeah. So it's so
yeah,
many factors.
yeah,
How do
and
you approach that?
that's good. Like so, the one thing I would say like in general is that any statistical you say okay it looks like the elves are expected to win X percentage in this matchup but they win less. That's only like the first data point. Then you have to look into the games themselves. What are the problems, and you have to ask the players and try to look into it. And then if you then are able to identify something clear things, then you can do like yes, some sensitivity checks, right? Is this map dependent only? Is it general? So the way you should interpret balance is not to use like one number and say this is the whole truth. Is to use even if you use like the very basic numbers, you still have to go a lot of steps further to then prove it, right? So you present the numbers, say, okay, we think it looks like this matchup is gives an advantage in all the MMR brackets. Okay, that's 1 point for like this being maybe a problem. Then you look at the games and you ask the pro players, people, what do you think are like the main weaknesses, strengths, and then you see like does that actually correlate with what the games happen? So let's say people say headhunters are too strong, and then you find out that like all games that were won, they were built like 3 headhunters. Then it's a non-factor, right? So you have to go further and further and further. But at a certain point, given the few amount of players that especially at the top of the Warcraft, it does almost become a question of what kind of do you believe, right? That's also why I personally think like changes are only targeted towards balance, not making the game more interesting. Should be very careful and small, because I think people in general agree like if it's not obvious to everyone that like this is a huge issue, then you don't need to do big changes. You can like tweak at the margins, right? Which I think some people find boring, but it's also the reason for it. Because people say small changes doesn't matter, and then you give 10 HP to a unit, and then people say the unit's broken, right? Or as the Pal Rifle would say, they didn't get plus 10 rifles, and that Pal Rifle doesn't work. So, yeah, I don't have like one clear, you don't have like a 10-step process for everything. It's more that you use data to start a discussion and then you go from there. And I think one thing we have to respect is that Warcraft balance is very hard to measure if you don't have any like if you don't have skill enough to use the tools at your disposal. It's it's a bit rough, but we can't like balance the game around people that can't use the abilities properly, right? So pro players' feedback and what's happening at the top level should matter more than anywhere else, in my opinion.
Okay, and the follow-up question is about the sample size that we get on Warcraft Champions, because there was an argument by an amazing human player, Mr. Todd, that we should usually look at the winning graph. So how
Yeah.
much money in tournaments, show matches the particular race won. And also you can look at the Warcraft Champions, but there is a sample size issue.
Yeah.
So how, and also we love Warcraft 3, but it's not as popular like Fortnite and other huge games like Dota. So there is also this sentiment in the community that, okay, Happy is dominating, but let's say if, I don't know, Zakard would come back
Yeah.
from being inactive for 20 years, he will dominate with, let's say, Orc, right? So
Yeah.
how do you look at this sample size issue?
I mean that sample size issue, or like the issue of looking at only tournament winnings, especially in the last few years. is will only get bigger because now you're getting maybe 1 to 2 show matches every day, and they're inviting maybe a sample size of like 4 to 6 players. And even if one player wins, which is usually happy, and one player loses, they both get some money. So this group of players will start rising and rising. Um, yeah, the problem that's it's kind of like an issue with tournament data is that the pool of players is so small. It's like the 16 to 20 same players, most Asian, a few European or CIS region additions. Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, both. That's also the case with champions data. It's becoming more and more difficult to be sure that you trust the data. So I would say like if there's one change in the way I try to communicate the data that I have tried to look at is that I used to be more this shows this and we should be pretty like this gives us some certainty. Now I personally would be a lot more careful and say this might indicate something. Let's discuss it further. And if all pros and or the community in general just then disagree, like that's not an issue. I think you're wrong. The data doesn't matter. I think that's fine. Like as long as we have something to start a discussion with, that is better than I personally feel without any like points to it that I struggle in that matchup, right? So, yeah, I don't have like a very good answer to how to fix the sample size, but I
Some
don't.
questions are just hard, you know.
Yeah,
It's not like
but using tournament earnings in general doesn't prove anything, unless if every tournament was available for everyone, uh, that would make more sense, right? But by itself, that data is biased because there's invitation tournaments that basically forces that to be a small group of people. Um, and you have players like Lin, for instance, who, from what I can tell, rarely shows up at tournaments. It's not because he can't play more; he just chooses not to. He would win a lot more money if he wanted, but he doesn't. He doesn't need to. Would be my guess, right? So, yeah,
okay. I would like to see your live reaction now to my idea
yeah,
how to mm, I process Warcraft Champions data. So my idea is as following: we take a pool of pro players. You can say like 2,300 MMR,
yeah,
and during the start of the patch, you basically freeze it's like starting point, and then you measure did the entire pool of those players, we divide them by race, did they gain MMR or lost MMR
yeah.
because of the balance. Have you tried doing something like that?
Yeah, I
You know,
haven't.
a human doing better or worse, because it may be actually interesting. You may like nerf one particular race like
Yeah.
in patch, but they are like good players that want to improve and they can still make some
Yeah,
MMR.
and it's always like always difficult also to see that even like given the if you put the let's say 2K300 and mark cap, the the average MMR, just the distribution of games won and lost, can be dependent on who's playing more. So let's say you now look at human at the current at that MMR bracket. From what I could tell in ladder now, both Sock and Fortitude has been pretty inactive compared to how they used to be. That means that the human size is a lot less games of those two. And when I look at those two players, they have higher win rates than expected in all matchups against, except with the exception against Undead, which is probably because they meet Happy quite a lot. But otherwise, they're overperforming in both matchups. But since they have so few games, they will have a low amount of the human games in total. So maybe it looks like human has lost a lot of like, oh, they're losing against everyone. But the two best human players are actually haven't like shown signs. But there's no issue. I've done like unofficially try to look at stuff like that. There's no problem doing it. We can easily replicate it. We have games by date. So you can just sort it by date and see how it evolves over time. But yeah, it has again like maybe sample size will be an issue. How many players about 2K3 MMR on average will you think it's for each race? Under it's probably like 4 or 5. So who knows? And now you would get a result for Happy, for instance. Oh, he's gotten 100 MMR up because we buffed Undead. Or Warcraft 2 champions enforced rules that made him not leave games to get played anymore. So you have to like keep track of those things as well, right? So, but the one thing good about the rule changes of champions now is that you get better data for the pro players, because it was becoming a huge problem that so much of the MMR that you base what you expect them to win on was so artificially leveled compared to what it should be. So that's actually a good thing for the data for the new patch now, is that it's going to be hopefully more precise in what your players' actual level are on the ladder. So yeah.
Okay, now comment from me
Yeah.
that I can see at this event that like it's a lot of joking around you, with you, not around you. That like you are the balance guy, and I saw many players, as community members approaching you with some balance idea. And can me tell you if someone wants to contact you after watching this video, what kind of how the feedback, how the idea should be structured for you to like treat it? I don't know, in the optimal way.
Yeah.
Because
So one thing like we made, then when we tried to make these community patch suggestions, me and Say Warcraft, which is the other guy that helped me on doing this, it has to be said that not that many of those suggestions came from us directly. It was more through conversations with pro players, and then maybe one or even community members way below that. But like, we have this specific problem matchup, or just like we want to introduce this. This unit is a bit weak in general, and then we like if we hear some suggestions, we maybe basically start adding that to like a full list, and then we do like feedback rounds and like make that smaller and smaller and smaller. So the way to like approach, if you wanna, I think the way, just even if you ignore me, the way to go forward with balanced discussion, the way you would posit any problem in my head, you say, this is the issue I'm trying to solve, this is how my suggestion to solving it is, and I think this will work because X, or because of this reason, right? So I think human has too easy of an early game defense against let's say elf, right? The way I would think that could help is maybe make defend upgrade slightly weaker, so you have more opportunity to do some harassment with archers and demon hunter. That would be like a way to structure an argument. Saying footman broken, fix is not that helpful in of itself. So yeah, I think that's. I mean, I don't see myself as the balance guy. Every patch that's come now is a combination of different people's feedback. But I think the reason we are listen to it to a certain extent, me and Sevorka's patch suggestion, is because we try to get a more like general feedback, and we try to at least present it in a structured way. So even if we're wrong, and the community can side we're completely wrong and just slaughter the PTR and say we have to remove everything, which is totally fine if the community thinks that, but at least it's presented in a way where you can kind of track what our idea is. And that's very much needed because the developers, no flaming here, but they don't in their patch notes say what they're trying to actually, what they're trying to achieve with the PTRs, right, and patches. So somebody has to fill that gap. So if you have ideas, any ideas are okay, are fine for sure, but try to like have some reasoning behind it.
okay, and to finish this interview
Yeah.
with the kick, what is your favorite Warcraft related drama? It can be old school, it can be present.
Drama.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, it's like reading the community drama challenge champions in general. It's just like a descent into madness, which I find funny, but I have to read it in a way where I don't read it too like I don't have to get all the details, because then you just fall into a rabbit hole. Um, I don't have like any current drama that I really like. I think currently there's a bit. I feel like the drama is a bit non-productive and less funny. Try to like think of what the current like big funny drama is.
Oh, the most popular answer in the previous interview was, of course, Todd Grabby in 2v2 games 2018.
Yeah, but I feel like that's water under the bridge by now. It's like so long ago. No, I mean I actually don't like have that. I mean I actually I'm as I think everyone. I think I love observing drama, but as long as it's more fun related and less like personal vitriolic, I find fun in most drama.
Okay.
So regular community drama chat I can find funny. The more personal bad stuff I kind of fall out. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough, Mr. Dondolare. Thank you, and good luck with your endeavors to make Warcraft 3, more balanced and with you like.
Same to you, Saul.